morning, everyone.
Got to switch.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a beautiful Sunday at the Common Ground Country Fair. We're so happy to welcome you here for our very special keynote. And I just want to say how beautiful the grounds look and how many happy, smiling faces I see. And that's all due to the volunteer efforts of over 300 volunteer staff and over 2,000 volunteer positions that really help make the fair and this Common Ground Country Fair community what it is. So we're, as a community, very pleased to welcome Jonathan Rosenthal, who has spent over 30 years working to transform the power of business from a destructive force of accumulation into a healing force, honoring the interconnectedness of all people and the earth. He co-founded Equal Exchange, a pioneering fair trade company that is now the second largest worker cooperative in the United States, as well as OK USA and Belmont-Watertown Local First. He has consulted with and advised people and organizations all across the food justice movement. In his current role as the executive director of the New Economy Coalition, Jonathan stewards a network of more than 190 organizations from across the U.S. and Canada who are at the forefront of creating these new economies using collaborations through strategies like cooperatives and public ownership to build community wealth and power. He's married to Laura Grodzki, who is here today, and they have two amazing young adult daughters. The title of his keynote address is From Local to System and Rural to Urban, Building a New Economy. And please join me in welcoming Jonathan Rosenthal.
Good morning. Hope everybody's enjoying the sun and heat of the day. It's an honor to be here today with all of you at Common Ground. I was at a Common Ground fair about 35 years ago, previous location, and I'm very happy to be here once again. This morning, I was talking with two members of the Wabanaki Coalition about this land, and they helped me understand that we are on occupied land today, and that there's been a long struggle for who lives on land, who enjoys the fruits of land. So I'd like to take a moment for us all to recognize our ancestors, our teachers, and the people that came before us from the Wabanaki Nation and our own ancestors that give us the courage to make the world a better place today. So join me in a brief moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today about my journey in my work and explore a bit of the new economy movement and help you understand kind of what we're up to, what we're doing, and what the future hopefully looks like. For me, I feel like it's a confusing time to be alive, and particularly in this United States. It's easy to be overwhelmed every day by the hate that's unleashed. But I also think it's an amazing time to be alive, and regularly come back to understanding that for those of us working to restore land and to create a more just world, this is our moment. And I say that because every day, in addition to the hate, unhealed wounds from slavery, colonialism, extermination of native peoples are being revealed. And that revealing gives us the opportunity to heal those wounds and create a better world. So for me, I choose to not ignore the hate and the fear, but to be uplifted as I hold the hate and fear by the incredible stories of communities rising to assist, to resist, to heal, to build. Again, I really believe this is our time. So I'd like to start with a little experiment. For those of you that are comfortable, I ask you to turn to a person next to you and do a simple experiment of just clasping the other person's forearm with your hand. So just like this for a moment, and as you do that, if you can take a moment to look into the eyes of that person next to you. Thank you. You can let go, and I do that to help us understand the power of connection. The energy that instantly, when we look into somebody's eyes that's close to us, that we're touching, the energy that is liberated. And to also recognize that there's usually a little bit of discomfort in being that intimate with somebody, even somebody we know really well, as is often the case with people sitting next to us. And I think the exhilaration and discomfort are oftentimes related. And so the work of New Economy, and I think the work of social change, in my experience, is about holding that energy and harvesting from the discomfort and the exhilaration, but from the connection of another human being, of being here, grounded on the earth, to build community. And we always have that choice. We can accumulate that energy for ourselves, or we can build community and share it with those around us and those that we love. And I think it's a profound choice that we have to make every day of our lives. Do we pull back in fear and accumulate that energy or those resources for ourselves, or do we come with an open heart and a big heart and look to harness that energy of connection and of community? So for me, I'll start a little bit of my journey story right here in Maine. When I was 17 years old, I attended Colby College. I lasted a couple of years there before I had to leave to do more interesting political organizing work. While I was at Colby, though, I found a home in Hungry Chuck's Inevitable Food Co-op in Waterville, Maine. And that propelled me when I left college to seek some way to support myself in the food cooperative movement. And so I found a job as a warehouse worker at Northeast Co-ops, previously known as NEFCO, no longer with us. And I'm very happy to be reunited today with Willie Marquardt, whom I worked with way back then, 1980 to 1984. So it's nice to see these circles of connection coming back around. And while I was working in Northeast Co-ops, I joined with some other people. We had the idea of connecting to liberation movements globally and thought that the U.S. cooperative movement should be joining and supporting these liberation movements in far-flung countries, mostly, as well as in the United States. Unfortunately, we found it really difficult to get support in the co-op movement to do that. So we took this notion of wanting to support liberation movements through trade and decided to set up a small company. And our basic goal was to see if we could survive paying farmers as high a price as possible instead of as low a price as possible. We were told we were crazy, and we didn't know anything about international trade, and we didn't have any money, and we didn't have that much business experience. But we believed in what we were doing, and we had a magical threesome of people, and the skills we shared amongst the three of us seemed to be just enough to keep getting us over the next hurdle. That company is still around. It's called Equal Exchange. Thank you. A crazy experiment. We managed to survive, and I worked there for about 15 years. And at the end of that time, a variety of things were happening, and for me, I felt like we had accomplished what we set out to do, which is prove we could do this thing. Paying farmers as high a price as possible, working in solidarity with cooperatives and liberation movements around the planet. And my co-workers were more interested in building this model cooperative company. It seemed to be a wonderful undertaking, but the entrepreneur in me wanted more risk-taking, more innovation. And so I moved beyond equal exchange. I did a variety of things to try and strengthen what became the fair trade movement. I did a variety of consulting projects, and one of them was to do a feasibility study to set up a banana company. So I set up this banana company, and through a strange series of events, ended up running a fair trade banana company for 3 years, which was an incredible experience, and at the time I said it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Bananas and small don't necessarily go together well. It's a very consolidated, concentrated industry. In fact, it was so hard that I felt there really wasn't that much room for us to really change the food system doing bananas. So I moved on, did more consulting work, back to my core of coffee always. And eventually what I was starting to see in the fair trade world was that the more success we had in fair trade, the further into the market system we got, the more difficult it was to really talk about the issues that mattered to me. And so unpacking power through lenses of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, different identity issues, as fair trade got more accepted in the marketplace, and we had companies like Ben & Jerry's and Starbucks and Walmart involved in fair trade, those conversations became nearly impossible. And so, for me, it was a bit of a crisis. I'd spent over 30 years building and working in this fair trade movement, and in many ways we'd had much more success than I could have ever imagined in the early years. And yet I felt deeply frustrated by where we were, and that there wasn't the opening. And whatever little opening there was getting smaller and smaller to really talk about the issues that I cared about, that I felt were important. And so I went through a period, I did a consulting project that lasted 2 years. It ended. I collected unemployment for the first time in my life. And I looked for a new job by meditating every day. This was a pretty challenging undertaking. I had a kid in college, another one on the way, and I wasn't quite sure what was next, but I knew that I had to get back to my roots of where fair trade started. And so a couple months into that process, with loving support from Aura, I got clear that where I needed to be was at the intersection of what I call small is beautiful and systems change work. And once I got clear on that, as sometimes the universe happens, I got recruited for a job to be the executive director of something called the New Economy Coalition. I had a hard time figuring out what they did, but I saw some videos of some board members and realized these are my people. They are talking about the things I want to be talking about. They are working to support and connect small organizations working on the front lines of social change and resistance to oppression, and they are talking and working at a systemic level, talking about what happens after capitalism. And so for me, I was very excited about that possibility. I applied for the job, and amazingly, after many interviews, I was hired for that work. And for me, it was a renewal of spirit of being back in a world where people were talking about the unhealed wounds of slavery, about racism, about gender oppression, about many of the issues that fair trade was getting further and further away from. So I realized again that another world indeed is possible. And as I've gotten further into the work, I've realized this strange contrast of the moment we're in, that this is the most exciting time, I would say, of the last 60 years for social change. Grassroots organizations are bubbling up everywhere, whether it's worker co-ops, renewable energy, participatory budgeting, other ways to build community wealth, community power, and help the communities. All across the country, all across Canada, organizations are rising, things are happening. At the same time, we have neo-Nazis marching in the streets. We have a president that seems to stir the flames of discrimination, and it's a very difficult and scary time. So I think our job at New Economy Coalition is to find ways to get the message out that this is our time, and to be able to tell the stories of these amazing organizations that are doing this work. I'd like to tell you a little bit about New Economy Coalition. We are a network of about 200 organizations across the U.S. and Canada, and our network is based on the idea that fragmented and small groups, using collaboration, to preserve identity and build power and voice, can create change at a systemic level. And so historically, I think progressive groups, folks on the left over the last 60 years, have gotten very fragmented. Important work has happened by focusing on identity lenses, but part of the difficulty of that approach is that we've been very fragmented, and so it's been difficult, other than in small pockets in the local areas, to really build power. So what the New Economy movement is doing is working at both levels, supporting people to build small, local, place-based organizations, build power at local communities, but then to link those groups geographically, sectorally, and cross-sectorally. So we bring together people across all kinds of sectors, geographies, races, classes, identities of all kinds. And it's all focused on how do we use collaboration to build grassroots power, to help groups be more effective and to get their story out to wider and wider audiences. So to tell you about a few of the groups we work with a group called MESED, working in post-coal communities in Appalachia. They're working on a variety of youth empowerment models, employment models, post-coal, all kinds of ways to build community health centers, different ways to restore vitality or to build vitality for the first time in Appalachia. We have some folks here today from the Cooperative Development Institute. They're an active member of building capacity in cooperatives and helping new cooperatives get off the ground. We have groups such as the Community Economic Development Group in Boston, creating a hub of new economy organizations. So their model is that take a geographic area like Boston, that we can build different organizations around a variety of themes, building worker ownership, participatory budgeting, local finance, other ways to build community wealth, community cooperatives. And by linking all of that together, we create a vibrant and powerful community that can work at a policy level as well as a local organizing level. So we have many other kinds of groups that are members, including Equal Exchange is a member. We have policy groups. We have large networks such as 350.org, People's Action, and we have small think tanks and rural hubs, urban hubs, all kinds of different organizations coming together. The network functions and builds this cohesion in three main ways. The first way is through convening. So we, every 2 years, have a major conference. It's not quite as large as this. The last one was in Buffalo, New York. We had about 1,000 people there for a several-day conference filled with educational workshops, network gatherings, plenaries, and ways for people who are newcomers to learn about what the new economy is all about, people that are veterans and experienced to get together with old friends, make new friends, and make connections, again, across geographies, sectors, and movements. We also have about 12 working groups now on everything from self-care to building a new economy policy platform for political campaigns. And those are all member-led, and then our staff We have 12 staff in the New Economy Coalition, provides the support and some of the organizing to help those groups flourish. We do some other convening work with other movements. So we work with the Movement for Black Lives, for example, Climate Justice Alliance, to help them bring new economy ideas and organizing into their work. A lot of the movements we work with are not economy or business focused at all, they're more resistance focused. And so we bring that building collaboration lens to them and help build more capacity in those movements to not just be focused on resistance work. The second plank of what we do is building resource redistribution. Right now it's fairly small. We mostly do that through our re-granting work. So we provide grants of up to $5,000 to youth and student groups, what we call frontline communities, working in low-income, rural, and urban communities. And we help them get access to knowledge, wisdom, and power. We're going to conferences, trainings, and other ways to build cohesion across the movements. The third leg of our stool at New Economy Coalition is through communications. So we are building what we call the movement PR platform for the New Economy movement. We help place articles with different kinds of media across multiple platforms. We have something called the New Economy Reporting Project, where we give stipends to journalists and train them in what is the new economy, and in exchange they produce pieces, print, radio, TV pieces about the new economy movement. We've supported our communications director and a few other folks in collaboration with another organization to produce something called Beautiful Solutions, which is a book about what is the new economy, and it features projects from around the planet, the best of new economy, and it's supported by a web platform, also telling those stories, and it's an open source platform so different communities can use the platform and populate it with their own stories. And then we have also a meta-narrative project in our communications work, and through that project we are helping people become better storytellers to tell the stories of the new economy, and we are working to have some aggregate campaigns so that we as a whole network can tell the story of the new economy and what's possible, what's already happening and what's possible in the future, and bring those stories to a bigger and bigger audience. We also have growing collaboration beyond our network. We work with the International Social and Solidarity Economy Networks in the US and Canada. We work with a group called Bali, the US Solidarity Economy Network, Democracy Collaborative, various cooperative institutions. We have an interesting project now with rural electric co-ops where we're using mapping technology to map where the overlay is between progressive organizations, green organizations like Friends of the Earth and the Sierra Club, People's Action, and members of rural electric co-ops. And we see the opportunity to organize in those co-ops, and they tend to be very conservative organizations, but they're consumer cooperatives, and the potential is there for community control in those institutions. So by using this mapping, we can identify the most progressive folks and organize them to get co-ops to bring in more renewables, be less dependent on coal and nukes, and use them as a distribution system in rural America. And it's one of the most scalable projects that we're involved in. 42 million people get their energy through rural electric co-ops. So the potential to use that cooperative vehicle for social change is tremendous. I wanted to add one more piece and then open it up hopefully for some questions and conversations. It's always my favorite part of public speaking, is having a dialogue with people in the audience. But before I do that, I wanted to plant one other very exciting seed, and that's we are working with a number of other networks in the United States in the very early stages of envisioning a network of hubs. So right now, in new economy work, like in so many things, there are people working in rural areas doing rural organizing, and there are people working in urban areas doing urban organizing. And there's not that many folks that have figured out ways to bridge that gap. And so we see the potential to build upon this idea of having a hub that can support a variety of new economy ideas and really build local economy in a whole new way in urban areas and rural areas, and connect them through our networks that are collaborating together. So the potential, if you imagine for a moment, in every rural region and in every major city, there's a hub that has a curriculum that can teach people about worker ownership, that can do training in facilitation, in public speaking, in participatory budgeting, in using community foundations to build local community organizations, a whole variety of skills and tools. And if we can take best practices and populate all across the country these hubs, we can create a vibrant, growing network of place-based possibility for building an economy that works for local people and is connected through these layered networks all across the country and even globally to other folks doing the same work. So that's really a core part of our vision for how we go from small is beautiful to really building systemic change, is through weaving together these different networks, weaving together the hubs, and having that interconnection at the different levels of organizing. So I think I'm going to leave it there and invite people to ask questions, make comments, and see if we can generate a little bit of a dialogue. I'm not sure if we have an extra microphone for audience. So please come on up, add a comment, ask a question.
Main traditions right here. So where are we right now? Sundial Garden. This is the big garden right here, right? Yeah.
So they're saying she can repeat the question
Right
if
here.
people want to try and check.
So my question has to do with the relationship between the type of work you're describing and political struggles and the attempt to use public policy to maybe support the work that you're talking about. So how do you see that relationship working? Thank you.
So the question is, how do we connect people working at a political policy level, trying to create social change and new economy work? I think in order for us to be successful at growing an economy that's based on meeting people and planetary needs and living in harmony with Mother Earth, we need to work at all levels. So policy is a critical part. Working in the political arena is a really important part of what we do. We have some members that work exclusively on creating policies, such as PolicyLink, and we have other members like People's Action that works in, I think, 39 states in the U.S. that does policy work at a local level. What we're just working on now with our policy working group is ways to weave that together into a more coherent strategy nationally. So the first part of that is building a simple new economy policy platform that anybody running for office, we have in Massachusetts, Bob Massey, who's running for governor, is a strong supporter of new economy. So he's eagerly awaiting our policy platform to come out so that he can draft his policy platform off of that. So I think using policy and weaving it into the local and regional and national organizing is an essential part of what we do. Some of our more sophisticated members can already do that. Push Buffalo is probably the most sophisticated new economy hub that we work with in Buffalo. And they have worked quite a bit with the city council in Buffalo, getting policy passed, getting people elected to the city council, and they've now taken that work to the state level because they realize so much of what happens in their case in Albany, the state capital, they're dependent on policy that's happening not just locally but at the state. So that's really the fundamental core. What we're doing is organize locally, regionally, state-wise, and nationally. And our job is trying to weave all of that together. This is a lofty ambition. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about sociocracy and how sociocracy might fit into this, and not only in terms of workplace democracy, but also in terms of creating a distributed economy that resists centralization and maintains, small-scale autonomy for each of those sociocratic groups.
Great question. Sociocracy for All is a member of New Economy Coalition, and different, not just sociocracy, but I think different approaches to how do we walk our talk in terms of how we run our workplaces and our organizations is a critical part of building a better world. So I think the focus on walking our talk and learning how to unlearn some of the habits we learned around gender, race, class, and how we behave with other human beings is critical. So I think sociocracy is one of those tools to help us create workplaces and ways of governing and running organizations that are consistent with our values. But I'd say that's fine.
Can you tell us what a new economy would look like in 15 or 20 years, some of the aspects and characteristics that it would have?
I think a new economy in 15 or 20 years, it's a long time, but it's a very short amount of time. So for me, the simple answer is we all have to figure out what that looks like. But my vision of what that looks like is based on this hub model. I think that's the most kind of replicable, scalable way to build a new economy. So weaving together across the country and planting the seeds where there aren't hubs, so that, like I said before, every city, every rural region, bioregion, if you will, has a hub that can support new economy ideas. I think what it would look like is just more of what we have. So right now, I think that I know of 4 or 5 major cities in the U.S. that have allocated money to develop worker ownership curriculum in their city. That's historical. When we started Equal Change, no one really in this country, other than a few small pockets, had really heard of democratic worker ownership. It was a tiny little thing. So I think what it would look like in 15 or 20 years is that every city and town would be looking at ways to support and grow locally owned businesses and build community wealth. If you think about the idea of wealth, our idea of wealth in this country is that people accumulate wealth in families or as individuals. And that wealth is often extracted, whether it's from the earth or from the labor of other people. So a new economy would look like there's more and more of our economic and social and cultural activity is built on the idea of building community wealth. Community wealth incorporates a healthy relationship with the earth and living organisms, and also takes the concept of wealth that we have, accumulating money for ourselves, and flips it and says, how do we build a healthy community? How do we support cultural workers? How do we make sure everybody has access to health care, to education, to healthy food, and right relationship with community? So that's a pretty broad idea, but if you take this idea of hubs and just building it out all across the country, having more common ground fairs where people come together, and it's a community-run enterprise. I learned there are 2,000 volunteer shifts over this 3-day fair. That's an incredible operation. 2,000 volunteer shifts. That's really awesome. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for being here today, first of all. Getting back to community wealth, I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate on examples of like how small businesses can incorporate the principles of the New Economy Coalition in their community, like from the ground up.
I think the best advice I could give is get get better connected. So learn about what's already out there and not always reinvent the wheel. I think we have to make whatever tools and experiences we bring in our own, but there's so much already out there. So I think for a small business or small organization, get connected. The internet's, of course, an incredible tool so that if there aren't new economy organizations in your area, find other ones and follow your passion. So if ownership is your thing, find the resources for ownership. There's the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops now does trainings, has an institute every year. They have a sister organization, Democracy at Work Initiative, that does consulting and support for worker ownership and employee stock ownership programs. So I think find what your passion is as a community or as a group or as a person, and find those resources. And that's part of the role that we play at New Economy Coalition, neweconomy.net. You find us on the internet. We have a growing array of tools, and just through our members and through our staff, we can always direct people that if you have a particular thing you're looking for, like we want to have, we have a worker co-op and we want to expand, but we don't have any access to capital. Contact us and we can connect you to some amazing loan funds that might be able to support that growth. So I think it's reaching out, building that community beyond your own local thing. That's the key.
Increasingly, international trade agreements are designed and have the effect of allowing corporations to encroach on the policy space that many of us are working within and in these smaller organizations. And so I wonder if your organization is working on policy at that level, and or if you have members who are working on policy in that level to preserve our ability to create these new policies where these kinds of visions can function.
We ourselves at New Economy Coalition don't work on policy. We do have some members that work on policy. I would say our whole global connection at this point, despite the fact I've spent my whole life working at an international level, it hasn't been our focus. We've really been focused on building a movement here. We are connected with some organizations globally. On a policy level, I would say our member Policy Link is working at the broadest level of policy. And then we have allies who do work more on policy, Farm Aid, Oxfam America, a few other groups that aren't technically members, but that we're in communication with, working on that policy. And I think the same principle that I've been coming back to, that we understand we have to work at all levels. So we've worked so far at supporting local organizations, and then a little bit at regional, state, and now national. Not so much international, we're just starting to work there, but it all has to go hand in hand. That's our strategy. And I think part of that we've learned from the neoliberals who organized over a 50, 60-year period. It's a different political context for them. But I think we've learned some valuable lessons for them about the need for long-term thinking and thinking large and working at all levels. For them, it's all levels of government, but also then there's a grassroots aspect. So, yeah, learning from folks that we strongly disagree with is part of the journey.
Okay, thank you for coming as well. I feel really inspired by your work and vision. I was wondering, how do you go about connecting your sister organizations and collaborators? What's the day-to-day? Are there regular calls? Or,
yeah.
And then also, when do you expect the next conference that you'll be putting on?
Yeah, I'll start with the second one first. The next conference will be next summer. In the next few weeks, we hope to announce it. It will be in the south of the U.S. We're just doing final negotiations on the exact place. Finding a place that's affordable, that can house many hundreds of people, and that's accessible for people across the country is a little bit of a challenging endeavor for us. So we made a commitment with some of our partners to be in the South this year, and that will be next June or July. Yeah, so the first part of your question, how do we bring people together? there's a couple different levels of that. On the big level, our conference, the key part of the conference, is an opportunity for people to come together. So that's serendipity, who you bump into at a conference. We have a pre-day at our conference for network gatherings. Last year, I think we had something like 17 network gatherings. So that's the Divest Student Network, that's Project South, people of color organizations in the South, a whole variety of different groups use that opportunity to be at the conference. We strongly support it with scholarships as well, to have a day for them to come together. So that's one part of it. Then following our conference, we have our annual members meeting. In the years we don't have a conference, we have it separately. So that's another way for people to come together. The last 2 years, we've used the annual members meeting to build collaboration based on what our members want to work on together. So this year we had a 2-day process of identifying what are the issues most important to people, what do they want to collaborate on, and out of that came 15 ideas for working groups, and 12 of those have come to fruition now. So we have 12 working groups, all based on the issues that were most important to our members, at least in this case, the members that were at our meeting. The third way is informal matchmaking. So I told you a little bit about Push Buffalo and how well organized they were. Through some friends, I met people in Denver that have a similar, really ambitious hub where they're working on affordable housing, jobs, nutrition. They have a supermarket, canning kitchen, all kinds of things. But they knew nothing about other people doing this work across the country. So we were able to connect them, and through that connection, then they came to our conference last year. They got to visit people around Buffalo, make those relationships, and then their learning goes a lot faster. They don't have to reinvent everything. So we do that almost every day. We're connecting people that have questions that want to keep people doing similar work. Thanks for the question.
We'll have one more question and then some closing remarks, and then will you be around a little bit longer, Jonathan, after that, maybe? Okay.
Thanks. I have a question and a plug. The question is, what's like one concrete policy advance that you've been involved in or supported at the local or state level around the country, just as an example of what you're trying to do policy-wise with your coalition members? And then just to let folks know, here in Maine, there's legislation that would incentivize the conversion of businesses to worker co-ops and of apartment buildings and mobile home parks to resident-owned co-ops, and conversion of farms to producer co-ops. So that legislation is going to be taken up this year. So that's an opportunity to engage at the state level.
Thanks for that. We, as New Economy Coalition, do not do policy work ourselves in terms of advocacy and lobbying, being a 501c3 organization. It's kind of a hard line. So we help bring together our members to do that more effectively through the working groups. We have supported in New York City and in Boston, coming together of a few different organizations to be able to lobby the city council to support putting money into worker ownership as a community development strategy. 2 weeks ago, I was at the inaugural meeting of a new organization that I'm on the advisory board of. That's Latino women in a community of Boston called East Boston. That's a heavily immigrant community. And they are supporting the education of undocumented, unemployed Latino women to form worker cooperatives. And the mayor's office in the city of Boston has sent a special representative to be on that advisory board as well. And he said worker ownership is one of the 2 best tools the city has to combat gentrification in Boston, where it's a big issue like in other places. So that's how we do it, is really from underneath. We're not out there doing policy work ourselves. It's about bringing our members together, supporting them in their learning and developing platforms. So it's a sort of indirect route to policy work.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Jonathan for coming out on this beautiful yet slightly hot day to talk about his really timely and important work. And we hope that he gladly accepts this Common Ground Country Fair t-shirt and wears it proudly at his workplace. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for coming. If you want to know more about the New Economy and New Economy Coalition, neweconomy.net. And of course, we are a nonprofit, like many other folks working here, so we gladly accept your donations. Thanks for being here.